All right, so now it's time for your questions and some answers. So we've got a few questions in the Q&A box. We'll get to those and we will answer as many as we can. And please, if you've got questions, put them in the Q&A box, and we'll bring Gordon and Chris back here. And I'm going to start reading some of these questions. And do we have? So we need Chris. Well, while we're waiting for Chris, we have a
I'm
question.
here. I'm here.
Okay, okay, good, good, good. Okay, so Gordon, I have a question from you. How did you get the dye test study done? And how can other groups replicate this? Can it be done proactively before CAFO starts operating?
Um, I should point out that that dye trace study was done without any cooperation by the state or by the CAFO operators. It was done, we were fortunate to have a noted retired hydrogeologist from the University of Arkansas conduct that study as a volunteer, and he had a team helping him out, a very qualified people who had done dye trace studies before who also helped him out. So that was a pro bono effort that was done outside of the administration of our state, and because it was peer reviewed, it carried weight, and that was an important factor on it. I don't see any reason why it couldn't be done proactively if it's being done outside of the bounds of the permit holder, who in most cases I wouldn't think would be cooperative. In the state in Iowa, I would imagine the same case would be true, that the state would not be supportive of something like that, especially if they had to spend money for it.
Probably right. And Northeast Iowa, where Driftless Water Defenders works, that's a karst area, and there's a lot of issues up there. Have you seen anybody look at trying to do any of those dye tests up there, Chris?
So we've done research in the karst area going back, more than 40 years now. And some of the very first information that we got was from the Big Spring fish hatchery in Elkader, and where we saw atrazine and nitrate and other ag chemicals in these springs in the water in northeast Iowa. And so, look, we know, this is pretty much settled science that these water soluble pollutants get into the aquifers and into these limestone streams in the karst areas very quickly. And so we see in Minnesota, the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy sued the agencies in Minnesota for uh, that there'd be more urgent enforcement of various practices in Minnesota to reduce the loss of nitrate in these karst areas. And so, look, I don't think that the science is in question here. We know what happens. There's thin topsoils, the bedrock is fractured. When we over apply nutrients, it's going to pollute the water. I mean, there's just nothing left to be said about that. We know what it is. What's left to be said is why political leaders won't do anything about it.
Well, that leads to another question here. So, this person said Gordon mentioned federal requirements for karst sites were instrumental in their fight. Please elaborate what these requirements are.
Yeah, that's a good question, because it wasn't until we really developed an understanding of how permits are managed in Arkansas, particularly NPDES permits, which the CNH CAFO was the first and last NPDES permit for swine CAFOs in Arkansas. They terminated the program after CNH debacle. But one of the requirements of the permit makes reference to this guidance document from the U.S. Department of Agriculture called the Agricultural Waste Management Field Handbook. And that document is supposed to guide the decision making regarding siting of a facility, of a CAFO facility. And it goes into great detail about karst, what to do in karst, and how to survey a particular property for the presence of karst. And it works like a decision tree. And had the state properly followed that guidance document, which they did not, they would have the decision tree would have concluded that they needed to seek a separate site, a different site, because of the presence of karst. And we were never able to make that argument, even though we realized it pretty early on in our battle. It wasn't until that permit expired and came up for renewal and the public comment period opened that we were able to effectively make that argument. And I think that's what ultimately pushed it over the finish line for us, was showing that the state did not properly issue that permit, and that's what the governor recognized too, and that's why he was willing to pay $6.2 million to close this thing down, because he said it was the state's fault that they should not have issued it in the first place.
I mean, here we had Kayla Lyon remove all language about karst in our livestock rules. That happened relatively recently. And so, we would need an environmental group to sue, so that's what we need.
Yeah, part of what you're talking about, Chris, was that executive order number 10, where they, basically deregulated the chapter 65, which has all the CAFO rules. They deregulated that, as much as they, to a degree. And now with chapter 65, you cannot make a rule that's more stringent than any of the rules that are already in there, that are already written. So you can weaken the rules, but you can't strengthen the rules that we've got right now, which was something that Governor Reynolds, initiated. It was an executive order, and then she got it passed as a law. So it's, it's pretty despicable, quite frankly, that we cannot, at this point, at least with rules, you have to pass the laws in order to have a more stringent, uh, law and rule put in. Um, I have a question here. Very impressive work. Thank you. This is talking about, the Buffalo River. Um, Many of us are fighting CAFOs in areas that aren't near a national park. What would you say to groups that don't have the national park or a beautiful river to help motivate the community and state politicians? Actually, it's a good question for both of you.
Yeah, I've given that question a lot of thought, and I think in our case, there's no doubt that the presence of the Buffalo River made our job easier, if you call a 12-year battle easy. But in the end, it was really the technical issue challenging the permit that moved the needle. Now, the Buffalo River certainly widened our appeal. It built our base because so many people are familiar with the Buffalo River and so many people treasure it. It helped us, build an active base of supporters. It helped us raise money. It helped us get media attention for sure. But in the end, it was that technical argument, analyzing that permit from top to bottom, that really made us able to sway the governor. Now he like you said, he got more calls and letters about the Buffalo River issue than anything else in his 2 terms of office. So I'm sure he was tired of hearing it. But in the end, it was the technical argument that swayed the argument in our favor.
When you look at a map of Iowa, the CAFO map of Iowa, we basically have 2 donut holes there. One is Jefferson County, and Francis kind of hit on why that is the case. And the other one is Dickinson County, around Lake Okoboji, Spirit Lake, and the other Iowa Great Lakes. And so, what's special about Dickinson County? Well, there's a lot of wealthy people up there with a lot of very valuable real estate, right? And so let's just call it what it is. Rich people have been able to keep the CAFOs out of Dickinson County because they like taking their boats out on Lake West Okoboji and having clean water. And so, unfortunately, here in Iowa, we don't have many things like the Buffalo River, right? Most of our stuff has been ruined already. And so, what argument do we have? We don't, what do we have to preserve? And I do think there's an argument to be made that we should try to preserve that very little that we have left. And of course, in Iowa, that might be the Great Lakes and then the driftless area. But then, of course, then you're sort of writing off the other 90% of the state, which is sort of shameful also. And so these are important questions on how do we target our efforts. And I don't really have the answers here. I think the effect on human health here with the cancer and the drinking water and the overall quality of life. We have these beaches and constructed lakes that were built with taxpayer dollars. And so Lake Darling, very close to Fairfield there. I mean, that was constructed with taxpayer dollars, and then, it's polluted by private entities, and then the taxpayers are asked to come in and restore them. And so I think in Iowa, maybe an angle that we need to try is these lakes. And so we have about 130 lakes here in Iowa. I think about 100 of those have been constructed at taxpayer expense. I think there's a real argument to be made that the public is paid to build these things and then they've been polluted by private entities. What's the remedy here in terms of why these things have been impaired?
Thank you. And I'll just add one little thing. I've been involved in a few different fights where the community found something in their community to really fight for and create um, uh, a lot of publicity around. One was in Potawatomi County where there was a nature trail that was used quite a lot. And the community rallied around that and they were able to stop this big chicken CAFO there. Up in Tama County, it was the right around the site of the home of the butter cow lady, the original butter cow lady, for the Iowa State Fair, and the community was able to rally around that. So there are these places that, if you can identify something in that community, and then the community stays together and persists, because that's the other part of it. They have to continue to stay and fight and strategize and work at it and know that it's not necessarily going to happen overnight, but it can happen because it does. So, but it is hard in Iowa, like you said, Chris. It's very difficult. We don't have a lot, but we do have, sometimes you can identify some of these areas that are um, strategically, you can do a strategic plan to save. And so you got to go for what you've got sometimes.
I'll just say Bloody Run Creek is something we focused on at Driftless Water Defenders in Northeast Iowa. DNR has designated it as one of 30 some Iowa outstanding waters. It's 6 miles long. The stream is 6 miles long. DNR will not get in front of an 11,000 head cattle CAFO that goes in up there. The cattle are there. Do we hear, have you ever heard a single Democratic candidate for any office in Iowa talk about Bloody Run Creek? Have you ever? I have not heard ever a single one talk about it. And so, as I said many times, the first step for Iowa is try to get the Democratic Party to embrace this issue.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't argue with that. Um, I think we have time for just a few more questions. Let's see what we got here. Has there ever been A decade in Iowa where the native Iowans really cared about the environment and water quality. I've listened to concerned people from environmental clubs and nonprofits talk about they've been fighting this uphill battle for decades. In other states, people care. How do you change people's hearts and minds? Have there ever been a time when legislators cared enough to fight for a good change in farming practices?
Well, in the 80s, after the studies at Big Spring up at Elkader came out, we did have some developments, and we had the groundwater tax that was voted into law. Um, and that funded initially the Leopold Center and then the Recycling Center at UNI um, and the Center for Health and Environmental Effects at the University of Iowa. And so we had some other legislation in the 80s. Paul Johnson was part of that, David Osterberg, um, and then Ralph Rosenberg. And so there was a little bit of a momentum after the discovery of the ag chemicals in the water at Big Spring. But after the Master Matrix scheme became law in the early 2000s, I think it's been terrible since then. And so I think it's true that I think one of the commenters here tonight said there's more of an environmental ethic in Minnesota and Wisconsin. I lived in Minnesota for a long time, 16 years, and I think that's absolutely true that the culture here and the ethic here is one of exploitation.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so I think that goes back, more than 100 years that our mindset is what we have here is to be exploited. And, how do we change that? I don't have the answer on that. I think, I've been to Arkansas, I've been to the state parks in Arkansas, I've been to Missouri, and seen what Missouri has. And both Missouri and Arkansas have far better amenities when it comes to natural resources than what we have. But the pollution is also bad there. I've seen some very bad streams in Arkansas, in particular, and so I think I don't have the answer, but I do think a good step is to ask for more public land, ask for more parks. I know during COVID, our state parks and our county parks here in Iowa were jam-packed. If you like camping or going to parks, if you did that during COVID, you saw that these parks were packed, right? And so I think there's a desire for more amenities here in Iowa, and I think that's one thing people could insist on.
Um, I have a couple more questions, but I have a question for you, Gordon, because you talked about how it's the technical stuff that was able to really help you succeed in getting this CAFO shut down and then the moratorium put in. There's a lot that goes into looking at these CAFOs, these applications from a technical basis. What kind of support did you have, to do that? I mean, I'm just curious what resources were available to you in Arkansas that, possibly may be available to people in Iowa too.
Well, we first tried to talk to the agencies which issued the permits, Department of Environmental Quality particularly, uh, asked them to help us understand the permits. Well, they just kind of talked us in circles.
Mhm.
I don't think they really understood. And I should mention that the one person who was primarily responsible for issuing the CNH permit now works for Farm Bureau. So that tells you a little bit about their mentality. But I think mostly we were self-taught. We spent hours and hours and hours poring over guidance documents and regulations, and we had to understand the permitting process. We had to understand how to read nutrient management plans, which led us into having to understand the phosphorus index. I don't know if it's in use in Iowa or not, but it was actually developed primarily here in Arkansas by a person who was assigned to study the CNH problem early on with the University of Arkansas. Um, but I would say primarily we had to learn on our own, and that was a long and arduous process, and I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, it's a lot because I've done some of that, with the work I've done, and there's a lot to it. So I'm very impressed that you were able to pull that all together over time
We
like
had
that.
lots of eyeballs on it, and we did have some professional help. We had attorneys that helped
Mhm.
us.
Yeah.
Earth Justice was a big help in pointing us in the right direction. We're also part of several other um, collaborative groups that had some expertise that helped us. But so much of the permitting process is state specific.
Right.
NPDS permits are a little bit different because they are a federal permit, um, but some of that outside help didn't always point us in the right direction, but it was helpful.
Thank you. And we're getting short on time. I'm just going to share one thing from Senator Art Stade here, and he wrote, Chris, I'm writing bills for some of the items you've mentioned, but not all. Could you send me your list of ideas? Okay, so um, you're on mute.
I'll just put it in the chat here.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah, a number of um, a number of us with the Iowa Alliance for Responsible Agriculture met with Senator Stade about a month and a half ago to talk about water quality bills and CAFO bills, and he does have a slate of bills he's going to be introducing, which we were all very grateful for. So I think we are pretty much a lot more questions, and I'm sorry we can't get to them all, but I think we've kept you all for a long time, and I really appreciate having this meeting with Gordon, you tonight, and with you, Chris. Appreciate you sharing your story, Gordon. And Chris, I really appreciate you sharing your policy platform because I think it really gives us some very important, um, you know, uh, goals to work toward. And I just really want to encourage all of us on this meeting tonight to work in whatever ways you can to advocate for better agricultural policy in Iowa because we deserve having clean drinking water, we deserve having safe recreational waters, and we deserve having our public health protected. And for people living in other states, that are here with us tonight, I encourage you to do all you can to protect your quality too, because water quality too, because this is actually, it's a national problem. It's a big problem in Iowa, but it's not just here. So on that advocacy note, I want to uh, just remind you to watch for that email with all the links for taking action to improve Iowa's water quality and to oppose the federal legislation that would make our food less safe, our air less safe, our water more polluted. Gordon and Chris, thank you so much for being with us here tonight. I want to thank all of our generous corporate sponsors again, and I do want to give a nod of the head to Susan Chapin, who works with JFAN to help us do fundraising and work with our corporate sponsors. She's a big part of our success in our being able to gather the grassroots support that we have. So thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you, Gordon and Chris. And I hope you all have a really wonderful rest of your evening.